Welcome to Chess Dog. I'm John, and today we have a game from women's Grandmaster Anna Muzychuk. As you know, she's ranked 7th in the world among female chess players. And in this game today, she faces a Caro Kann. And usually when you play someone, you want to attack the weakest part of their position. But in this game, she goes after the strongest part of her opponent's position. Her opponent is Gergana Peycheva, who is a Fide Master, and she's either 17 or 18 years old at the time of this game, so another very talented young player. And let's watch this game because it really is an interesting insight into strategy, a strategy where you actually attack the area on the board where your opponent is strongest. Quite unique. Anna Muzychuk begins the game by playing e4. She plays a lot of different things. Knight f3, c4. She decides to play very aggressively with e4, c6, d4, d5. Her opponent plays the Caro Kann defense, and Anna Muzychuk plays e5, which is really these days the main line at the highest level, gaining that space in the middle of the board and trying to squeeze your opponent with that space. Bishop f5, getting the bishop outside of the pawn chain before locking it up. And here's the first direct move. The main move here, or most commonly played move, is knight f3. Anna Muzychuk plays c4, immediately attacking that d5 pawn. This is an opening that for black that tries to create a strong point at d5, the one that cannot be taken down. So Grandmaster Muzychuk starts by directly attacking that strong point with c4. e6. Black creates a structure on the light squares, and that's what Anna Muzychuk goes after. Knight to c3, putting more pressure on d5. h6. Her opponent wants to create a place to tuck her bishop back on h7. One of the problems black has in this Caro Kann advanced variation is that these pieces, particularly the king-knight and king-bishop, get in each other's way, and black sometimes has a hard time uncoordinating or coordinating, I should say, those pieces. And allowing that bishop to go back to h7 can allow the knight to have access to that f5 square. So that's the idea. Knight g to e2. She wants to play the knight to g3 to put pressure on that bishop on f5. Knight to e7. Knight to g3. Threatening that bishop at f5. And that, of course, would give white the advantage of the two bishops. Two bishops plus a space advantage is huge in chess. Bishop h7. The knight can go to g6 or f5 now. Bishop to e3. Knight to d7. Now, at this point, Anna goes all in on grabbing space. She plays a move that's not the most common move, but she plays c5. Now, look at that space, that clamp in the middle of the board she has with the pawns at c5, d4, and e5. So she really controls that space. However, there is a danger here. If black is able to undermine that center, this could really rebound on Grandmaster Muzychuk. So she's fully committed. She has to protect that center at all costs. If she can protect it, then she'll be in great shape. However, if it gets undermined, she could be in big trouble. So this is a bit of a risky move. b6, attacking that pawn. b4. Now, here, perhaps a5 would have been a good move from black to further undermine that structure. a3 would be playable, but takes. Knight f5, bishop f5. This is maybe a defensible position for black. But if white were to play b5 in response to a5, creating tension on the queen side, that probably would be the best response. Something like takes. And if knight takes pawn, rook to c1, bishop takes b5, check. And in this position, black is really tied up. King is stuck in the middle of the board, and that would be a big problem. So that might be a reason why black would not play a5 here, which would be a natural move. She plays pawn takes c5, b to c5. And so black has to say, how am I going to free my position? The knight at d7 is poorly placed. It doesn't have access to any squares except for its original home square at b8. The only pawn move that could undermine the center would be f6, but that weakens all those light squares on the king side. Maybe black can try to sacrifice a piece for a couple of pawns and get some mobility that way. But black is definitely suffocating seriously now. Queen to a5, putting pressure on that c3 knight, pinning it, threatening to capture it. Queen to d2, blocks the pin, defends the knight. Knight to f5, and as we know, when you have less space, you want to trade pieces to give freedom to those pieces. I already spoke about how the knight and bishop get in each other's way. Well, if you can trade one of them off, then that helps free the position. So Peycheva plays knight to f5 to trade pieces off. Knight takes, bishop to e2, bishop to e7. Now, black still has a problem with her knight. She also has a problem with her king because there aren't many safe places for the king. If she goes to the king side, white's attack would be very, very swift indeed. The pawns could advance, the possible sacrifices on h6. So the king has to stay in the middle of the board, and that creates a real problem for black. That, along with that knight, gives white the advantage. White castles, rook to b8. Trying to control the one open file on the board, and the bishop at f5 controls the b1 square, so there's some possibilities there. But now Anna begins her attack. g4. She wants to play g4, f4, and f5 and attack the base of black's pawn chain, which is here at e6. And she does that starts with tempo. g4 threatens the bishop, so the bishop has to move, so that gives her an extra tempo in the attack. Bishop h7, f4, wants to play f5. Now h5 is played to help undermine the structure. Now, she could play h3 here to support that pawn, and that would be okay and safe. But Anna has a very sneaky idea here that's really hard to see, and I imagine her opponent may not have seen it. She realizes that if she can play f5 and isolate that pawn on e6, she has a really powerful tactic that will become available to her. So instead of playing h3, she just plows right on ahead with f5, not worrying about the g-pawn being supported by another pawn, because she knows that if she takes it at e6, that she has a really strong move. And black goes ahead and takes on g4, and now pawn takes e6, pawn takes e6. And this is the position where the hammer blow move is played. Anna Muzychuk plays a tactic that is really, really strong. I'll give you a second to try to figure it out for yourself. Okay? All right, here it is. Knight takes d5. Wow. The knight can't be, looks like it can be captured by two pawns. The problem is it unveils this attack on the queen. So if either pawn takes the knight, white would just take black's queen. So it unveils this pressure. And in this position, black only has one move to stay in the game. Now, after this move, white is still better, but it's still a game, right? Still playing. And it's a really hard move to see, and Pyecheva misses it. It's really hard to see. The only move to survive here is the move bishop to d8. It's a retreating move, which makes it hard to see. It defends the queen at a5 and helps control that c7 square, which is important because the knight can deliver check on that square. After knight retreats, queen can go to a3 and try to penetrate on the b2 square. Also, it's possible to play bishop f5 and try to defend g4. Because of king safety, white still has a clear advantage here, but again, it's still a game. It's still a game. But after the move in the game, it is not. Pyecheva plays queen to d2, and now knight to c7 check. And now Anna Muzychuk has a winning advantage. There's no question. But her opponent keeps playing, as she has every right to do. And so we get to see the winning process here. First of all, she has to respond to this check. There's only one move she can play. The F file is off limits. White controls it. So king d8, knight takes e6 check, king e8, knight takes g7 check, just munching on those pawns. King to d8, knight goes back to e6, king e8, and only now does white recapture the queen. Those were all checks. So there was nothing black could do about her queen. Now white takes the queen. Bishop to h4, bishop g4, rook g8, h3. Now it's interesting, in a position that's very lopsided in white's favor, black creates some tactical pressure. Not enough, but it's really interesting to see how she does this. Rook to b2, going to the 7th rank. Bishop to e1. White would love to trade pieces, challenges that bishop on h4. Now bishop to e4. Okay, it's starting to get a little tricky. Black is threatening rook to g2 check. That would allow discoveries with the bishop on e4. That's pretty dangerous. And if white moved the rook to f2 to challenge the rook at b2, black would just take it with the bishop on h4. So it's kind of a tricky position. But Anna has no problem with it. First of all, she plays knight to c7 check. And what that does is force the king to a dark square, which he moves to. And now bishop takes h4 is with check. And now f2 is no longer controlled. So king takes knight, and now rook to f2. And now there's no more challenge. Rook f2, rook f8, king e3, bishop d5, bishop e7. The bishop wants to get to d6, deliver check. Rook g8, bishop to d6 check, king to d8, and rook to b1, and the threat of rook to b7 attacking the knight, the a7 pawn, would be decisive. And in this position, Gergana resigned, and Anna Muzychuk won. A very impressive game, a good example of how to use space in a Caro Kann defense to really keep your opponent bottled up. She played aggressively and was rewarded. Thank you for joining us at Chess Dog. See you again soon. Bye.